A Yubikey vulnerability. Oh no. It's not the worst thing in the world though. Sextortion scams, which no matter what the order is, because we switch off every story, I will let Nate take that one because he has very strong opinions. Clearview has received a fine. There's been a new Bitwarden client, which I'm very excited about and I need to test, and a lot more. Welcome to Surveillance Report 194, where we are dedicated to keeping you private and secure with the latest news in the past week. I'm Henry from Techlore.
I'm Nathan from The New Oil.
And our promo segment this week is all of you, our community members. So Patreon is probably one of the best ways you can support this podcast if you are a recurring listener. It's very helpful on our ends to be able to know what we can get from Patreon people every single month, as well as people on LibrePay. And for doing that, we also like to give back some perks. So you get access to the Q&A episode. You also get access to VIP versions of this episode. And as of right now, like even as we're speaking, it seems like there's some activity in our Signal group. So if you want to be part of a tiny little community on Signal, that's a new perk that we recently added for all of the advertised tiers. So even if you join the $5 a month one, you get access to our Signal group and get to chat with other people and talk to Nate and I. It's a cute little community there. If you don't like recurring stuff, totally get it. We also support Monero, and you can just give us a one-off tip. We do see those tips, and we very much appreciate them. Without further ado, let's get into the highlight story. And this definitely made some news because they have a pretty good reputation. And so to see a pretty big vulnerability like this is alarming, but it's not the most alarming thing. So Yubikeys are vulnerable to a cloning attack thanks to a newly discovered side channel. This is a cryptographic flaw, and it resides in a small microcontroller used in a large number of other authentication devices, not just Yubikeys, which also include smart cards used in banking, electronic passports, and the accessing of secure areas. So the researchers have confirmed that all Yubikey 5 series models, which I believe are still the newest models, can be cloned. So somebody can essentially make a copy of your key. This is not a backup method, for those of you already thinking about this. They have not tested other devices using the microcontroller, such as the SLE78 made by Infineon, and the successor microcontrollers known as the Infineon Optiga Trust M. I assume these are more enterprise things because I've never heard of these before. But the researchers suspect that any device using any 3 of these microcontrollers that are listed in the sources down in the description, as well as a different cryptographic library, contains the same vulnerability. Now, Yubikey's not quiet about this. They came forward pretty quickly and issued an advisory in coordination with a detailed disclosure report from Ninja Lab, the security firm that reverse engineered the 5 series and devised the attack. So all Yubikeys running firmware prior to version 5.7, which is probably most of you listening, myself included, which was released in May, that's why. So unless you got your Yubikey in the last couple months, you're probably affected by this. Updating the key firmware, though, on the Yubikey is not possible. So there's really nothing that you can do about this outside of buying new Yubikeys, which means that Yubikeys are permanently vulnerable. The exploitation of this vulnerability is demonstrated through realistic experiments, and we show that an adversary only needs to have access to the device for a few minutes. The offline phase took them about 24 hours with more engineering work in the attack development, and it would take less than 1 hour. Now, this isn't something that most people can just do. It requires about $11,000 worth of equipment and a sophisticated understanding of electrical and cryptographic engineering. It's not a super easy to do kind of attack. So this could only really be carried out by nation states or other entities with comparable resources in highly targeted scenarios. And that's actually quoting the researchers, even though we normally say stuff like that here when we cover research like stories like this. So this is something that's going to probably happen in the wild. If you want to see the full flow of this attack, it'll be in the sources. They're very in-depth, so if you want to check that out and kind of get the nitty-gritty, it's there for you. And people who want to know what firmware version they are running can use the Yubikey Authenticator app. The upper left corner of the home screen displays the series and model of the key. And again, if you have anything before May, you're probably running not 5.7. Now, Yubikeys provide optional user authentication protections, so you can have a requirement for a user-supplied PIN code or a fingerprint or a face scan. I assume that probably requires the biometric model, unless they're talking about the security within the Yubikey app. But for the cloning attack to work against Yubikeys using these additional measures, an attacker would need to possess the user verification factor as well. So this is a big plus for those of you using any kind of authentication on top of just the key itself. Now, Solo key and nitro key, sounds like Nate did some research and confirmed to him that they are not affected since they don't use those specific chips. So doesn't mean there might not be a similar vulnerability on those, but it's not the same vulnerability on those devices.
Real quick, Only Key has not gotten back to me at the time of this recording because I know some of you guys are going to ask. That's a popular one as well.
So that's kind of the end of the story that we have it in terms of takeaways that I have, and I'm sure Nate has some too. I'm a Yubikey person. I made a whole video on Yubikeys. I have one plugged into my laptop. I have one on my keychain, and this is not something I'm super concerned about, mainly because the main reason to use a Yubikey is for phishing protection. Right? That is the big advantage, because with TOTP codes, those 6-digit codes, those can still be phished, because when you type in the code, the site can essentially put in the code in real time and gain access to your account if it's a fake site, which is a phishing site. Whereas with a Yubikey, it's cryptographically signed to specific websites. So you can't really accidentally put in your Yubikey on a fake website. It has to be on the actual website. So this kind of vulnerability doesn't change that. I think the real threat that comes from this vulnerability is if you're somebody who thinks someone's going to try to clone your key to take it elsewhere and then try to impersonate you. But it's just a really high level thing. I think it's somebody who would have to be trying to break into your account when you're a specific person who's very targeted. They already maybe have your username and password and they just can't get in because of a Yubikey. So they see you at a coffee shop, and while you're using the bathroom, they clone your key and run. But this stuff is so just high level that it's not something I'm concerned about. And I don't think most people have to be concerned about it, but it's really good they caught this. And I'm really glad they fixed it. And so future Yubikeys will not have this flaw. Those are all my takeaways.
I think I'm kind of in the same camp as you. This is something I personally am not worried about because it just doesn't fit my threat model. If anybody's going to go through the effort of $11,000 in 24 hours, they're probably going to kidnap me in a van and beat the crap out of me until I give them my passwords.
Yeah, it's probably more likely than someone doing this.
Right?
Because if they need physical access to your key, so if they have physical access to it, I don't know how they would have got that without already either just stealing it without you knowing, or just abducting you and kidnapping you and just getting you to force you to use it, you know?
Or in my case, they could like break into my apartment. But again, at that point, there's like, I'm going to be honest, I don't consider myself a brave person. There's better ways to intimidate me. Like, I don't see this happening. And then I think that goes for the vast majority of listeners too. I mean, if you want to get a new one just because it makes you feel better, feel free, but definitely don't. This is not one of those things that like, oh crap, everybody needs to throw out their Yubikeys and buy another one.
Yeah, I mean, a way to put this, it's no different than someone breaking into your house and just stealing your Yubikey. It's the same exact risk.
Pretty much.
It's just now, I guess you might not know that they stole your Yubikey because they made a copy of it. But it's the same exact risk to you, essentially.
I think the only other thought I really have is NitroKey just today, they put out a blog post about this and how they're not affected. And I kind of disagree with some of their takes. Like one of their things is, like, oh, this is why firmware updates are important, which I agree with, except that there's a reason Yubikey doesn't do firmware updates, and it's so that way there can't be like a malicious update. So it's kind of like, which trade-off do you want? And I have a NitroKey, it's right here, and I have a Yubikey that's currently plugged in, and I'm not going to take it out because I'll probably hit the button and accidentally shut something off. But, it's like, do you want the firmware updates but also that risk, or would you rather have this risk without the firmware update? So there's pros and cons to each, and if you're one of those people who's like, no, I think they make a really good point, then hey, buy a NitroKey. I don't know. There's trade-offs to both, I guess. So both I think are valid.
I guess one extra takeaway on my end here, a big reason why I'm not concerned is because for me, a Yubikey is almost like 3FA, because I use unique emails and unique usernames on every website. So to some extent, the obscurity of the account is already a big authentication method for me. Then there's the password. And then the Yubikey is kind of that third step. And a lot of sites now ask me for a PIN when I use my Yubikey. So that's an even extra step now when I'm logging into websites. So because I use my Yubikey as my, let's just call it MFA, because I use Yubikey for MFA and not for passkeys, I'm not super concerned about something like this. I would be more concerned, though, if I was somebody who was using passkeys on my Yubikey. So just keep in mind that passkeys are better than how most people use passwords, is generally what you want, but passkeys are not better than using something like a Yubikey with a proper username and a proper password. So I think different tools for different people. I still like passkeys overall, just be aware that in an attack like this, I would be a little bit more concerned if you were using it as a passkey, because then someone can just clone your key and now they just can get access to any of your passkey accounts without that much effort. So it's a little bit of a different threat, I think.
With that, we'll move into our data breaches. Our first data breach comes from a mental health care firm who exposed therapy sessions due to their unsecured database. The cache of information included more than 120,000 files and more than 1.7 million activity logs. This was discovered by a security researcher, and the database links to medical provider Confident Health. The company, which operates across 5 states, including Connecticut, Florida, and Texas, helps provide alcohol and drug addiction recovery alongside mental health treatments and other services. The exposed documents include some medical notes on people's appearance, mood, memory, their medications, and overall mental status. One spreadsheet seen by the researcher appears to list members, the number of appointments they've had, the types of appointment, and more.
Planned Parenthood has confirmed a cyber attack as Ransom Hub claims the breach. For those who don't know, Planned Parenthood is essentially where a lot of people go for different reproductive reasons. Here in the US, they're a New York-based nonprofit. The Ransom Hub ransomware group claimed responsibility yesterday for the attack at Planned Parenthood, threatening to leak 93 gigabytes of data allegedly stolen from the organization's systems in 6 days. The threat actors published various confidential documents on their extortion portal on the dark web as proof of their claims. No word on how many or what data was involved.
And our next data breach is just a really quick one. Car rental giant Avis discloses data breach impacting customers. This investigation revealed that the attacker had access to the business applications from August 3rd until August 6th. On August 14th, they also discovered that the attacker stole some customers' personal information, including names and other undisclosed sensitive data. Just to kind of keep it brief, we're still trying not to go too long with the data breaches. We had 2 others that were a little more business specific, but there was like customer or employee data taken. The first one, business services giant CBiz discloses customer data breach. And the second one, microchip technology confirms data was stolen in cyber attack. So friendly reminder that all these stories are in the show notes and the links if you want to learn more about those.
And now we're going to go into the company news, and we're going to start with public demand that has gotten Apple to finally announce Find My for South Korea. So complaints from users in July of 2024 within South Korea reached a point where they were finally petitioning the government to allow Apple's Find My feature to work. Any iPhone made for sale in South Korea had Find My permanently disabled, so it wouldn't work even when the owner was in a different country. Now, in a statement on its Korean website, Apple has announced that it plans to bring Find My to the country shortly. The statement does not address why the service has not been available before, but Apple has previously commented. And I don't have that much context here. What did they comment?
Here, let me pull it up while I'm talking. According to a user petition submitted to the National Assembly petition website of South Korea, Apple has said that its Find My is disabled, quote, because of internal policy, unquote. While far from confirmed, it's most likely that this policy relates to privacy and how South Korean law can be interpreted as saying all location data must be stored for 6 months. The wording of the law is such that this is open to interpretation, but it can also be read as saying that the government must be able to access that stored data. Then they go on to point out, only if this were the reason Apple did not deploy Find My in South Korea, it would also apply to the country's outlying territories. Yet, Find My works correctly in, Bakery. I'm not even going to try that. Anyways, two other outlying territories of South Korea. We did not have any research this week. Well, we had the Yubikey story, which was our headline story. We did not have any additional research, so we're going to move into politics, and we're going to start with Clearview AI has been hit with their largest GDPR fine yet, as Dutch regulator considers holding executives personally liable. So the Netherlands Data Protection Authority, which I'm also not going to try to pronounce, they go by AP for short, said on Tuesday that it has imposed a penalty of 30.5 million euros, which is around 337 million US dollars, on Clearview AI for a raft of breaches of the GDPR, which is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, for those who don't know. This comes after confirming the database contains images of Dutch citizens. This fine is larger than separate GDPR sanctions imposed by data protection authorities in France, Italy, Greece, and the UK back in 2022. In a press release, the AP warned it has ordered an additional penalty of up to 5.1 million euros that will be leveled for continued non-compliance, saying Clearview failed to stop the GDPR violations after the investigation concluded, which is why it has made the additional order. The total fine could hit 35.6 million if Clearview keeps ignoring the regulator. And then the article just kind of talks about how Clearview keeps running into trouble like this. They have largely just decided they're not going to pay the fine, and they've appeared to have stayed out of Europe, at least in terms of like trying to do business with people. But the article notes that GDPR applies whether you do business or not. If you're a citizen, GDPR applies to you wherever you go, wherever the business is based.
This is another one of those examples of stories that we've been kind of covering. I think this is the third iteration of this story now on our podcast, and that's kind of the goal of listening to this podcast, and it's why we want people to listen consistently, is because you get updates to things. We covered not too long ago about this whole legal situation between Ireland's privacy watchdog and X, formerly known as Twitter, over data use for AI. There was this legal investigation, and now they have agreed to permanent limits. X agreed to suspend its processing of European users' data for AI model training in early August after Ireland's Data Protection Commission initiated legal action against the company in relation to consentless use of people's information to train its AI chatbot, Grok. For those who don't remember or didn't hear when we talked about this earlier, they pretty much just by default enabled without even getting user consent or alerting users that they were starting to use their user data to train their AI. So they said now, as a response of NOIB, which does some activism in the EU, I believe, Twitter got away without any fine. Data already ingested for Grok AI will also not be deleted, and Twitter continues to offer the product based on unlawfully obtained data. They also confirmed that NOIB will not withdraw its complaint on this issue.
All right, with that, we'll move into free and open source news. Mullvad has released their Defense Against AI-Guided Traffic Analysis, or DATA, on Linux and Mac OS. In May of 2024, Mullvad released Data in version 2024.3 of their VPN app for Windows 10 and 11, and they have now added it to 2024.5 for Linux and Mac OS. To enable it, open your desktop app, navigate to the settings, and then VPN settings, and then WireGuard settings, and then Data, and ensure the setting is switched on. For now, it is only available on certain servers in Amsterdam, London, Los Angeles, and New York. And for more information about the servers that support Data, you can see their server list, and there's actually a data toggle that you can hit to see which servers support it. They also have a link in the blog post to their original post about Data.
Just because it could be a little bit confusing for you audio listeners, it's DAITA. It's an acronym. Data. Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of an interesting name, but I think it makes more sense visually than through audio. Bitwarden is the password manager, free and open source. They've released a native mobile app for iOS. Previously, this was not the case. Bitwarden kind of used the same unified experience, which is nice, I'm sure, for development on their end to keep things simple, but they never really had the best OS integration. And in terms of like UI, UX stuff, it was always a little bit iffy. But they've released a native mobile app for iOS, and I'm really excited for this. And I really want to test this out as somebody who was not the biggest fan of Bitwarden's UI on mobile or anywhere, actually.
Yeah, I was caught off guard by it because it like updated. Like, I think I opened it, I logged into my work computer, and then sometimes when I'm like waiting for stuff to load, I just check for updates and I'm like, oh, there's updates. And then when I opened it again later that day, I was like, oh, whoa. Like, it is completely different. It's not like, oh, they rounded some corners, they like added a color gradient. Like, it's top to bottom different. I'm still getting used to it, to be honest. And with that, we'll move into the Misfits section, and I will take the story that Henry wanted me to take. Sextortion scams now include photos of your home. This comes from Krebs on Security, so as usual, great reporting. If you want to know more, check out that link. But it really sums up pretty well in the initial paragraph. An old but persistent email scam known as sextortion has a new personalized touch. The missives, which claim that the malware has captured webcam footage of recipients pleasuring themselves, now include a photo of the target's home in a bid to make threats about publishing the videos more frightening and convincing.
Our last story of the week is a Bluetooth upgrade, which boosts precision tracking and device efficiency. So the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, or SIG, has released version 6.0 of the Bluetooth Core spec, introducing several new features and enhancements. The update includes Bluetooth channel sounding, which brings true distance awareness to devices, potentially improving Find My solutions and digital key security. Other additions include decision-based advertising filtering to improve scanning efficiency, and a monitoring advertisers feature to inform devices when other Bluetooth units move in and out of range. There's more, but that's the most privacy-related stuff. Really, really light week this week, which is probably good for the world. There was that Yubikey vulnerability, there's a sextortion scam, Clearview was fined, there's that new Bitwarden client, and quite a bit more, but not too much. It was a pretty light week again. So maybe next week will be more, maybe next week will be less. We'll see what happens. But Thank you all for listening. We appreciate all of you, not just tuning in, but also especially those people who are giving back to us every single month on Patreon. We can't do it without our patrons. You guys are awesome. And again, if you want to join the Patreon, you get access to a lot of cool perks besides just supporting this podcast and keeping it going every week. You get access to our VIP episodes, which leave in a little bit more of our commentary. So if you felt that this week was too short, the Patreon version is always longer and always has a little bit more that we say. And if you want the cheaper tier, it's just $5 a month. You get access to our Q&A, which we post midweek every week. And you also get access to our Signal group as well. So you get access to talk with other people. And it's a nice small little group right now, but it's pretty active. It's not uncommon for me to come back to dozens of messages and then I have to spend some time getting caught up there. So we're also on LibrePay. And we also support Monero for just direct one-off tips as well. With that said, I want to thank you all for listening. We both really appreciate it. Again, you all listening really helps us not just do well with the algorithm, but it also is just nice to see our viewership continue to grow. We always leave the stories and the show notes down in the description. You can always reach out and send us a story if you have one at news@surveillancesupport.tech. And the final thing we want to ask is to share the podcast around because spreading things by word of mouth is the best way to do it. We don't do any kind of traditional marketing back here. So we just do this podcast, hope it performs well and gets new people on board. And we hope that you all share it and leave a rating and do all that kind of good stuff. So I'll stop rambling. Thank you all for watching and we'll see you next week.